Welcome to MetaPod, the podcast where we discuss operational execs and organizations that make and move stuff, and our common headaches, digital transformation, the forever labor shortage, and doing more with less. And now, the host of MetaPod, Ron Crabtree.
It's Ron Crabtree here, back with another episode of MetaPod. And here we talk about for organizations that make and move products, primarily North America, but well beyond it, are dealing with the three common challenges of the forever labor shortage, digital transformation, digitization of work, applying this crazy thing we're hearing about called AI, and then finally just being able to do more with less resources, people, equipment, supply chain issues, et cetera, et cetera. And the guests that come to my show are sharing various elements about what to do about those things. And I'm really pleased that Rocky Vienna is going to join us here. And he's on my very short list of people I would think about when, who's got expertise and actually been successful at applying artificial intelligence and other digital transformation methods in large organizations with very complex transactional processes, such as supply chain, order to cash, human capital, moving them through our processes without getting all caught up in the fuzzy buzzwords. So this episode is really for you if you're facing a lot of complexity and hearing a lot of noise around digital transformation, AI, and trying to figure out how to simplify supply chain visibility, accelerate order to cash, modernize workforce management systems. So Rocky, tell us a little bit about you.
Hi, Ron, and thanks for having me. So I've spent most of my career in Silicon Valley and more than 20 years of that in the C-suite as a chief information officer, a chief technology officer, and also a chief operating officer. And I've led transformations from the inside, having sat in those chairs. And as a consultant, I've worked with private equity firms and mid-market companies that really needed to leverage technology into measurable business performance. And this experience has really taught me something simple about how powerful this question is. And that is, really technology only creates value when it starts with a business outcome. It's not about the technology at all. It's about defining your desired business outcome. And that's the foundation of what I call the outcome first methodology. It's a disciplined approach to AI and automation adoption that begins with the question, what result are we trying to achieve here? And so working with clients, we define the desired financial or operational outcomes first. And this could be margin improvement, it could be cost reduction, efficiency in supply chain, or growth, just general growth. And only then do we define the workflow modification and technology to deliver those results. And most organizations do this backwards.
Yeah,
I was just going to say, so most organizations do this backwards, and they buy technology and then hope to find the ROI later.
Which, that's definitely a mistake. And so that was really good. And now I'm really anxious to teach me. I'm going to admit that I'm not a Luddite, but I am no expert in how do you actually apply, tools like artificial intelligence in complex transactional processes like supply chain. So for our audience, I can ask if you can offer up 3 diagnostics for me and other people who don't know a lot about how this really works and how to monetize AI. What are 3 key areas you would look at and evaluate in a company, no matter who they are, right? They're involved with tangible goods and they have complex processes. Give us 3 different things that you're looking at. Why are we looking at those? How do we measure those? How do we gauge the nature of the opportunity or threat to our organization? So I'll just turn it over to you and tackle that.
Sure. That's a great place to start. Most companies start in the middle. They start with just applying the tools rather than asking the hard questions. And the first hard question to ask is about AI or business transformation readiness. So is my quality of data sound enough? Am I looking at the right problems to solve first? Most companies will just try to do 5 projects at once rather than hyper-focus on that one deep business transformation that makes sense. And then a lot of companies pass up the organizational and cultural changes that are going to be required for adoption of that technology. So that's where I would start with, much like a technology due diligence that private equity companies do on their targets. It's like, is this company ready to move in that direction? Is it ready to scale? Is it ready to adopt AI in business transformation?
So walk it out with us. Maybe you could share a case study or an example where you did the evaluation for a company to help them understand the scope of the gap, right? How big is the disconnect? Could you share any ideas or suggestions about, I don't want to think about it. I'm going to walk down the hall and ask some questions. What do I need to be looking for?
So a lot of that honestly depends on the industry that you're in, right?
Right.
So the business transformation, and I like to distinguish digital transformation from business transformation. Digital
Yep.
is a means, but the outcome is business transformation. So your business transformation opportunities are going to be different in manufacturing and retail and healthcare, because each of those industries will have very different pain points. So, so the method that I use in terms of AI readiness really focuses on the pain points that are first found in those industries. So it's hyper focused on industry first, data readiness, and the cultural readiness. Alignment with the executive team is huge. A lot of companies, they just, the exec team, they've never done transformation before. They kind of like to manage things the way they are, don't move anything. But these days, your competitors are moving and they're moving fast. So you have to have the executive team alignment to make this happen.
So what I'm looking for as we're talking with the organization is I'm looking for evidence. So what are a couple
Well,
of questions you might ask just to say we've got a problem here or they're well aligned? What are basic questions you might ask just to
sure.
get a
So
sense for how big is the gap?
So I think every company is looking at, the velocity of cash through their company. How predictive is cash coming through? Can I look into the next 2 or 3 quarters to understand? It's on the agenda for every board meeting, right? Is the velocity of revenue through the company. So when we look at the foundation workflows for that, they're primarily in the quote to cash workflow, not just the order to cash. And you can look at order to cash and say, hey, no, our problem is that we are taking 20 days to close our books. And this actually happened when I was at Apple Computer. It took us 20 days to close our books. Root cause was we had 27 different charts of accounts. That's the problem. So so when we look at a workflow and how deep we go into a workflow, you're not gonna solve the I want to close my books faster by just looking at the order to cash. You have to look at quote to cash, because there's probably 5 days of reconciliation that happens in the close process. And if you don't slay that dragon, don't automate it, slay it, then you're not going to really get the outcome that you're looking for, which is a close in 5 to 7 days.
Cool. Cool. That's a great example. From a diagnostic perspective, anything else before we talk about what to go do? What others should we be gapping, right? Taking a look at and saying, is this an area we should look at and how big of an opportunity may or may not be there? Or what's evidence that we need to do something?
I think that happens in every exec meeting, right? Just follow around the room in terms of what's on the agenda, what are the pain points of the company, are we trying to grow and scale, are we looking at international opportunities, and that's basically your agenda, because that's where the pain points come up, right?
Okay.
So in my practice, what my firm does, so I've got a bunch of resources that, like key resources, they've all been in the C-suite. They've all had 15 to 20 years of experience in CTO, CIO, CFO. We've been there. So we talk with the exec team about these exact issues. What are you trying to accomplish from a strategy point of view? So we always align strategy before we talk about tools.
Cool. Well, if there's nothing else in the diagnostic side, now I'm really interested in the practical sage advice you'd offer that can't be easily Googled, that executives and people trying to understand how to really monetize and get the real true business value out of leveraging tools like AI. What's the advice? What do we go do?
That's a really good question. I think that's where a lot of folks stumble. What we do is we be ready, right? It gets back to the readiness. So if you can't tell me how your cash flow is working, if you can't tell me if you're a professional services organization, what's my utilization of my consulting resources? Are we at 80% or are we at 105%, which is a better place to be? Then your data is not ready for the AI or robotic process automation journey. So starting with the data is absolutely most critical. And then ensuring that on day one, you involve your staff because there's a cultural change coming. Most of the failures in AI adoption, I think IT just quoted 95% of projects fail. And the primary reason is the lack of adoption. So if you don't include your staff, because your staff knows that either they think their job is going away, not necessarily so. It could be changing though. I mean, decision points are changing. Who makes those decisions are changing in the workflows, and they need to be brought along from day one so they can understand how is this impacting my job and how I perform my job. Is my job going to change? So that adoption is critical. If you don't have it, then the transformation is not going to stick. People are going to find workarounds. And then you're going to lose the return on investment on the transformation journey in general.
Let me ask a question. I recently had the pleasure and the privilege to work with a large auto supplier, and we did a form of activity-based costing modeling, value stream mapping, activity-based costing modeling, and we also matrixed in all the different sources of information. Think about a matrix from left to right with 25 different sources of information, from spreadsheets to email to product lifecycle management software to project management software, quoting, costing, purchasing, going on down through this whole list. And we use that to do a few different important things. Try to understand from, am I going to quote it? The quoting it, winning into business, and then all the gates to get it in production, and then later how you manage engineering changes that inevitably come through from the OEMs for the products you're going to make for them in the automotive tier one industry. And we really use that to do a Pareto analysis around which relatively few steps consume most of our resources, which of the relatively few steps consume most of the time, that's the elapsed time it takes for the process to unwind, and which of the processes had most defects, meaning it caused rework loops, rework cycles, go back through, fix things because we couldn't get it right the first time. We had to iterate over and over. For example, with automotive components, you've got to go through something called crash testing. And that can be done by literally taking the parts and go smash them, like in a vehicle crash, to running computer simulations. In other words, if I change the metal thicknesses, diameters, the types of fasteners, the radius of the part, whatever, and then I go crash this thing digitally, which, by the way, turns out to be one of the huge time sinks, right? From a digital iteration perspective, they'd run a ton of loops to get to some confidence that this particular design was going to actually perform the way it needs to be. So, long-winded question. Do you advocate using some forms of mapping and whatnot to be able to say, hey, there's 100 things going on here, but here's the 20 that are most important, and here's why? Do you advocate that?
Absolutely. A lot of folks will look at Six Sigma or Lean Six Sigma. In my world of private equity portfolio companies and small to medium business, they don't have the patience. They're looking at 3-year exit, maybe a 5-year exit. So when you talk about Six Sigma or even Lean Six Sigma to a private equity operating partner, they just glaze over, right? It's like, no, we're not doing that. We need more instant results. And I think that's one of the best things that the whole AI and RPA, robotic process automation opportunity gives us, is the opportunity to very quickly iterate analysis and design. It kind of reminds me of, and this may be urban legend, but I'm reminded of the story of Deming when he was in Japan after World War II doing quality assurance, and the Department of Defense, the U.S. Department of Defense, reached out to a manufacturer, ball bearing manufacturer in Japan, and they said, you can only have 0.01% of defective ball bearings in the order as part of the contract. And the U.S. based company received the shipment of ball bearings, and in it was a small box all by itself of ball bearings. And they called the manufacturer and they asked, "What is this separate box of ball bearings?" And they said, "Well, those are the defective ones." So it's that ability to hone in on your quality assurance and not just, take a look at how do we make quality better, but asking the deep question of how do we eliminate defects.
Right. Cool. Very cool. Didn't mean to
That should be a
sidetrack you.
process. Sorry?
Yeah, didn't mean to sidetrack you. I was just peeling this back a little bit based on my frame of reference. So thank you.
Got it. Got it.
All right. So what else did we go do?
So, a lot of it is like where to start. And I think that's where most companies fail in terms of business transformation. They're often led by the chief technology officer, which is the wrong place for it to be led. This is business transformation, not digital transformation. The digital part is, certainly technology can manage it because we know how to manage big projects, big transformational projects. We know how to implement ERP, which is very difficult and cross-functional. So we understand the project management part of it. Where most CTOs and some CIOs fail, especially in small to medium business, they know how to manage the technology. They can keep the email running and the networks running, but they don't have a conversation with the CFO about workflow automation, or with the VP of manufacturing about robotic automation on the work floor. They don't have that business acumen yet. So that's why the business needs to take the reins. That's why the executive team needs to assign business leaders to take the reins of business transformation. And technology can certainly manage the process. We know how to document, we know how to do Gantt charts, we know how to move projects forward. But it's the ideation process that I think the technology group has a tendency to lack on.
Okay. So as part of that, where I mentioned, leading this whole effort of discovery. And at the end of that, we talked about the engineering change process, right? Which, if you think about all the gates, right, from designing a product all the way to at full run at rate production at volume, there's a lot of steps in there. But an engineering change comes along from the customer, could push you go all the way upstream to the configuration of the product. They make you iterate through things like crash testing. Again, if you're an automotive supplier making components that are crash tested, and we found out that, geez, we went through and looked at all the activities, right? The serial and parallel activities. It takes about 2 weeks, unless you're expediting, right? Pushing something through to get a change through the process at a cost of several $1,000s. At the same time, their number one customer, or one of their number one customers, I think it's General Motors, is currently demanding suppliers figure out how to turn around any engineering change request in 2 days, or they're not going to pay for it. So in other words, here's the change I want to make. You have to come back to me and tell me what it costs to implement that change. And if you can't tell me what that number is in 2 days, I'm not going to pay it. So now you got a problem.
Sure.
It's a 2-week process, and we now need a 2-day process. I think that's what you're getting at, is using the business come back to you and say, this is what it is today, and we understand it, and it needs to be like this.
Yeah,
In
absolutely.
the future. But it's got to be at some level of granularity with some specificity.
Sure. And Ron, a lot of the time spent in the change sequence is probably in the analysis of the change, right? Like, what do we need to change? How are we going to change it? How do we retool? And that's where AI models can really help in
Accelerate.
that cycle. Exactly. Of the analysis and documentation of the change. and costing of the materials required as well, and checking the supply chain if you have those materials in process or not. So that's where AI and robotic process automation can really.
I'm learning something here. I'm learning something here. Thank you. I'm
Sure.
learning something. Thank you.
Yeah.
Cool. Keep going. I'm sorry. Didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, so there's a lot of tools out there. I talk to a lot of CTOs, and they're starting to complain about the cost of implementing AI. And part of the reason for that is that these AI tools and the popular ones are like ChatGPT, Grok from Elon Musk and X, and Claude is another famous one. Those are the ones that are mostly used. And you get enterprise licenses for these, and you get a number of tokens. And those tokens, they're like quarters, right? So every chat you have or every process you run, it eats up tokens. And the mantra's been make sure everyone in the company is AI literate. And that means they have to use it. So it just eats up these tokens, and now costs, much like in the early days of cloud computing, costs are just going through the roof. So a lot of that is because of the large language models that are specific to the tool you are using.
Okay.
So I'm really starting to lean toward small language models, which are they're more secure, they're behind your firewall, they're a little bit more difficult to implement, but they are business knowledge specific in terms of your business rules, your inventory lists. So it's an enclosed model, much more reactive and easier to change to your business context. So I think
Right.
that's going to be a big move in the not too distant future. Small.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Learned something else new. Thank you very much. What else should we be doing, Rocky? From an advice perspective, what should we go be doing as leaders in our organizations?
I think it gets back to readiness. So one thing that I'm finding is that the executive team, they've got a business to run, right? I mean, they're already busy. And yet the introduction of really deep business process automation, it's self-disruption, right? You're disrupting
Right.
how you're doing business. You're
Right.
redefining, maybe even up to a target operating model that you're redefining and saying, well, this is how we used to do it. And in a year or 18 months, we want to operate exactly like this, right? That's probably the deepest change you can make is in your target operating model. But these executives are very busy doing, just keeping the wheels on the bus,
Right.
and answering to the board, right? And answering to board mandates. So one thing that we do in Vienna Technology Group, my firm, is with the expertise we have, we act, not as proxies for the executive team, but we partner up with the executive team. Like I would partner up with the CIO or CTO. I've got my finance guru teaming up with the CFO, and collectively we take a look at what are the biggest opportunities. So we come in as a shadow resource for the executive team to define and manage the transformations that they need to implement. And then we continue to do oversight as well. And what we hand back is a finished product with documentation. We train people. We don't want to be there forever. We're not like one of the big four. We want to do our work, collect our check and move on to the next client. And it's really about, and I know it's a different way of doing business, but it's kind of part of our ethos.
Very cool. Well, you certainly give me some good things to think about. Anything else from an advice perspective in terms of what to go do before we get into wrap up here?
I think it's just start asking the simple questions of what pain am I kind of what pain am I looking at here in terms of moving the company forward, right? One exercise I like to give CEOs is that, let's say, you're a small to medium business, a private equity team just came in and they bought your company for a couple of $1 billion. You've got a nice paycheck out of it, and they've got you on a 1-year do not compete. So after a few months, you leave, and at the end of the year of the do not compete, you're thinking, I love the industry I was in. I'm going to get back into it. And I'm going to compete with my old company because now I can. But now I've got the opportunity to start with a blank slate. How would I disrupt the company that I used to run? If you have that mindset, you can truly be transformational about disrupting yourself. And I think that's a really great way to start to think about the opportunity of business transformation.
Yeah, I really like what you said because I was going to ask you that very question next if you didn't bring it up, is whether you advocate the notion of some form of design thinking, or I call it blue sky visioning of,
Yeah.
to your point. I mean, I've heard some really cool stories about forward organizations saying, let's take this group of cross-functional people, put them together, and their task is design a competitor that would put us out of business.
Mm-hmm.
Design and tell us what the attributes would be of a competitor who would put us out of business, and using the outputs of that to move through some blue sky of, hey, if we got to start with a blank slate, no facilities, no supply chain, no equipment, no people, and design that future state process to execute flawlessly as a market leader, and you freeze that, say, okay, now here's where we are. Our monuments, the things, the things that we're going to have to do. Here are the government regulations that are not going to go away, that we might have considered didn't exist in the blue sky future state. Here's all the documentation, regulatory, and all the things, all these hoops we have to jump because of customer demands. And then you come up with that intermediate can do, right, in a
Yes.
reasonable time period. Have you used that sort of technique successfully or no?
Absolutely. I call it first mover advantage, right?
Hey, I
So,
like that. I like
yeah.
that.
So if you're in the industry, and we can take a look at the two biggest examples, and that would be the rental car industry and the hotel industry. One kind of dominated now by Uber and Lyft, and the other by Airbnb and VRBO, right?
Yeah.
Now, the assumption of the old model was we need to own the asset, not just the supply, but we need to own the asset, and that's capital intensive. So how do I move if I'm in a capital intensive industry? How do I move to OpEx? That's a good disruptor.
Oh, that's a great example too. Reframing the problem.
Exactly. Yeah. Thinking, I mean, they call it thinking outside of the box. Get rid of the box. Don't need the box. Right.
Exactly. So organizationally and as leaders, I think what you were saying is something I was thinking about. We talked briefly about this before we started the recording, is this notion that, AI isn't going to take over people's jobs. People that leverage AI will take over those jobs, right?
Yeah.
That's what's
Yeah.
going to happen. But one of the things that's really starting to hit me in the face on a personal basis is I have to learn how to ask the right questions, all right, and
Yes.
frame it up. So if you're going to leverage AI in your business, we have to develop the skills in our organization to actually frame the problem correctly. The old Einsteinian formulation of the problems often more essential than solution. Get really good at asking the right questions.
The right question. Right.
And I'm wondering if you resonate with that. Would you agree, disagree?
No, absolutely. I think that's a really salient point. You talk about in your other podcasts, you talk about the forever labor shortage,
Right, right.
right? And that's a real problem. And that's going to be exacerbated by the fact that we hopefully have a lot more manufacturing being repatriated to the United States. It's like,
Correct.
where's the skill set? How do we get the skill set aligned? And that's a topic for another podcast, I'm sure. But it's the same question that companies need to ask in terms of and it's the human-centered approach to transformation. Some CEOs I talk to will call me up and say, "Hey, I want to use AI to reduce 20% of my workforce." It's like, well, you got the wrong partner. That's not what we do. We use AI to augment your existing staff. So, and a great example, the old quote to cash reconciliation problem. It's one of my favorites because it's just rings so true for me. And that is, during the close process, you've got your financial analysts doing reconciliation. They're working nights, they're working weekends. You slay that dragon, you give them a life back, and now you can repurpose their skills, their analytic skills, around financial analytics rather than being a clerk, right? So I think that's where the change shift is going to happen, or should be focused on in the organization changes we see in terms of the real work being done by staff.
Awesome. Rock, you did a fantastic job here. I got to learn a couple of things and get some new perspectives I hadn't quite considered that way. So I'm very grateful for that. How do folks get in touch with you if they want to pick your brain and ask you a question?
Sure. Well, I'm going to be certainly on this podcast. So this will be running around LinkedIn and a few other sources, I'm sure. But you can reach me at Rocky, ROCKY, at viennatechnologygroup.com or my website, which is www.viennatechnologygroup.com. No spaces. And Vienna is spelled Vienna, just like the city.
With a V at the beginning.
The V. V is in
Right.
victory.
Rocky, thank you for joining me.
Ron, thanks, and look forward to seeing your future podcasts. Great information, and I like to share them on LinkedIn whenever I can.
Awesome. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this episode of MetaPod, and I would encourage you to, like the podcast. Be sure to share it with others if you think this brought value. Really appreciate that. And I want to thank you for your time and wish you great success.
Thank you for joining MetaPod. For requests on topics or to ask questions, you can connect with Ron Crabtree 3 ways: via email at metapod@metaexperts.com, via LinkedIn, or by calling him directly at 734-425-1455, extension 103. Lastly, if you love the show, please consider leaving a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app. We truly appreciate all your support.